Okay, so we'll get started now. This class today, I want to make this more a class about you and your teams. So I don't have too much in the way of slides and straight lecture. What I want to do is go through a couple examples on Code Sandbox that might help with some of the issues that teams have brought up to me, different concepts that you want to be able to hit home a little bit harder. So I'm going to go through those, and then I'm going to use the rest of the lecture at least an hour and a half for teamwork. And then I'll just navigate between the different teams, answering questions as you have them. My main goal here is to set you all up for success next week. So before I get started on that, does anyone have any questions, either issues they've been having with Code Sandbox or concepts that they are still having a difficult time wrapping their head around that we can talk about now before I get into the bulk of the coding?
I actually do well about
Yes.
the email you last week.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the forking thing really helped. So it actually saves now. The only thing that I'm having an issue now is linking multiple HTML pages to the same CSS. I copied the same header with the link reference styles, all that stuff to the other HTMLs, but they still don't display it within the actual So I'm not sure.
I'll go through an example. I have an idea. I'd have to look at your actual code base once we break out into teams, but I can think of a couple root causes that would create that issue, and I'm pretty sure it should be a relatively easy fix, but we'll see. The thing about coding, as I'm sure you all know now, is that little tiny things, one line, even one character, can completely throw everything off. So,
yeah, it was really hard to find on Stack Overflow because every time I would type HTML and CSS, it would give me a problem similar but not related to that issue. So.
Yeah, and on that note, I think the one thing that you all will probably struggle with the most and will need my help with the most is anything that's platform related. So something related to Code Sandbox or how you're integrating maybe a different framework or library that you've tried to import. That's going to be more difficult to find on the internet just by Googling or looking on Stack Overflow because it's specific for the most part to Code Sandbox. So now instead of dealing with everybody who's ever coded on the internet, you're only really getting the questions and answers for people who have used that given platform. So for that, be sure, and this goes to everyone, be sure to come to me as quickly as possible. Send me an email with any questions so that I can help you resolve it and you don't end up getting stuck on it too long. As you all have seen so far, when you ask me a question, I'll generally be able to figure out what the problem is and then give you general guidance. I don't give anyone code, but I try to give you as much guidance as you need to get moving. So I think that can really help you with getting unstuck. Any other questions? Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
I'm having trouble with Parsley.js. I don't really know how to link link the Parsley.js into our system.
Okay. So that's something that I can go over with your team during the breakouts. And then I'll try, I don't think it'll make sense to just show everyone in the bulk of the lecture before the breakouts, but I'll help you all specifically on that.
Okay, thank you.
And I know one problem with Parsley is that I've actually never implemented it myself. So that there might be just some brief issues with that. Okay. So I'll get started now. So the main focus of this particular lecture is going to be algorithms and cookies. So one of you, I think it might have been Nia, mentioned wanting to learn more about cookies. So I'm going to spend some time explaining cookies and how they can be relevant for your sites. Now, actual usage of databases is going to be a little bit difficult within the scope of this project. So I think the best way to store data for your prototypes is going to be through cookies. And then I'll explain next week a little bit about how databases would replace the role of cookies if you were to implement a full scale, fully backend and database inclusive app. Now, even though we won't be using databases, the type of coding that you're doing on JavaScript is essentially backend code. JavaScript is kind of this weird code I mentioned where it's both front end and back end. Some people don't consider it full back end, but if you understand all of the ifs and thens and queries that you're doing on JavaScript, especially if you get involved with the saving and retrieving of cookies, it's really the same thing. And it's not a far leap at all to then figure out how to implement something like Python. In fact, I would argue that Python is easier than JavaScript. So if you understand JavaScript really well, your capability in bringing Python as a backend language into your app is very high. And then I'll show you the steps of how you would go about doing that with your particular app. All right, any other questions? We'll move forward then. So what is a cookie? An HTTP cookie is basically a small piece of data that you end up storing on a user's browser. So I don't know if has anyone ever taken steps to erase or clear the cookies on their browser? Natalie, I saw you nod. Do you want to maybe talk about what you might have had to do in that case and or why?
Sure. So I think there was a time that either my laptop was really slow and I had to like clear out everything.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I think it also like cleared my history.
Yes.
Yeah. So just because, like I mentioned before, my laptop was running really slow, and I don't know what was the issue, so I decided to clear everything, but it completely cleared like some tabs that I didn't want it to be like closed. Yeah.
So cookies are there for both good and bad reasons. As you mentioned, sometimes they can slow down your browser because it is information that is burdening the browser. And if you've never cleared cookies before and you visited a whole bunch of sites, you could have thousands, even more cookies sitting on your browser, taking up space, not being very useful. So it's basically data that's stored on your browser to tell the website how you've interacted with that site in the past. And that can help them provide more personalized info. So Natalie, I'm sure once you deleted your cookies, you saw that certain sites might have been a little bit less easy to navigate. Either they didn't remember certain autofill information that you were used to them remembering, or they didn't provide the adequate personalization that you were used to on that site. So that's the good side of cookies, and why deleting them can make your experience as a browser or as a user less optimal. And then on the flip side, it's how these cookies are used to make your experience much more streamlined as a user. It's also how targeted ads work. So that's sort of in between good and bad. If you like to have ads that are more relevant to you, then that's great. And cookies can be used to see which sites you visited in the past and then take that information to deliver ads from those sites back to you. So if maybe you go to West Elm all the time to shop for furniture, suddenly you're getting ads in your browser on other sites for that furniture. Ideally, that's something that you're actually interested in. They also can be used to record other information from you, sometimes good, sometimes bad. With health, there's a lot of worries that if you maybe put indicators that you have a certain disease or have certain issues, what we call personal health information, then using cookies to store that can really be a gray line and ethically questionable. So that's why when we visit sites now, we see a lot of banners that pop up that say, is it okay that we use cookies to track your activity within the site? So any questions about the general purpose of cookies? So I'm going to show a little bit more about Bootstrap. I know some people mentioned that they'd like to see a nav bar that collapses, as well as see how they can get modals, which are these little pop-ups provided by Bootstrap, to show up on their web app. And then another thing once we finish that, I'm going to show how to use cookies to then provide even more interactivity within your site. So I'm going to exit out of here. Okay, so I've brought up the class example that we worked on last week and that I shared with you all. Now what I want to do, because it's a little bit annoying that this site has this nav bar that's taking up half the screen, I'm going to try to make this nav bar collapse. So I'm going to go into index. And so we've got our nav bar right here. And you can see that it says nav bar fixed top, nav bar header, and then right here, container fluid. Now here is where I'm interested in. So this nav bar, this is the list, the start of the list of all the tabs that I've got in my nav bar. In order to make them collapse, I need to create a parent element. Does anyone remember what a parent element is? Would anyone like to speak to that? Nobody?
Is it just like an element that fall under, like you like divide them and then you give it like a class or something like that they all fall underneath, like an ID?
Yeah, exactly. So you're creating a class. In this case, it's a div, but it could be a P. It could be any number of things. It's a div with a class. And again, it actually doesn't even have to be a class. It could be a class or ID or anything. The whole point of the parent element is that everything within it, its children, so to speak, is indented within that element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the entire list, and actually I put this in the wrong place. So I'm going to erase that. Go right before the opening of this list for the nav bar that has all the tabs, and go all the way down to the closer, to the close tag for that UL, right? Indent it all forward, and then put it within this div. So I've now created a new parent div with the class, we'll call it parent right now, that is containing this whole list. So this is the child of the parent. Now the use of parent divs, or parent elements in general, is that I can now design in CSS anything with this class to impact this. So if I want to like align all of these in the center, or if I want to make them all red instead of blue, then all I have to do is change the CSS of this parent div class to the criteria that I want, and it's going to impact all of the children. So instead of calling this parent, because this actually isn't a real class, I haven't done anything with the class called parent, I'm going to use a built-in Bootstrap class called collapse. So it's called collapse, and then nav bar collapse. And then I'm also going to give it an ID called my nav bar. Okay, so now I've got this parent div element that contains all of my nav bar tabs, and it's called collapse, nav bar collapse, and then I gave it an ID. I can name this ID whatever I want. Now you can see it's all disappeared. So it has all disappeared, but I actually realized that I don't have any way to open it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to create, now I believe it was Nia last week who mentioned the 3 horizontal lines. You can actually import those 3 horizontal lines using something called glyph icon. And I mentioned that in the last lecture. Glyph icon is right here, okay? So, but I haven't set any connection between that and the collapse div. So when I click it, nothing happens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a div called button, because I want it to be a button, although it doesn't have to be. I could just call this a regular div and it should work just fine. And the type is going to be button. Class, it's going to be Nav Bar Toggle. And then I'm going to create something called Data Toggle. Collapse. And then Data Target. So I've now basically set the parameters, and this is all built into Bootstrap. You don't have to memorize it. If you just Google Bootstrap Collapse, you'll see examples that use this. This is a lot of code. It's finding the right example and then figuring out what triggers they use. And so this is what they've done with Bootstrap. Data Toggle Collapse. Now it's basically set the stage for having this button be a trigger for collapse. And now I just have to tell it what I want it to collapse. And in this case, it's hashtag for ID equals my nav bar. Okay, so now within that button, I'm putting that hamburger span. And now you can see it used the built-in Bootstrap formatting to put that hamburger icon all the way on the right. And now when I click it, it collapses and expands. Okay. It's pretty simple. I mean, I know if you're thinking, oh, I got to memorize all these, it seems intimidating, but you really don't. I don't know what these are off the top of my head. I just go to the Bootstrap example, Bootstrap Collapse, and then whatever my favorite site is to look at that sort of thing, they'll all pop up. There'll be like 6, even more examples on your Google results for how to implement or code examples for the Bootstrap Nav Bar Collapse. Okay, so now I've got that all set up on my site. Any questions about Collapse and how that works? One thing I'd like to bring up, because I actually found this to be an issue when I had first started, is I didn't have jQuery imported. So just make sure that you have all of the scripts imported that you need to. It's in the earlier lecture where I introduced Bootstrap. It shows exactly what you need to import. Make sure those are imported on your HTML. I've found in this code sandbox example, just because of the way it works where you have to really, each HTML has its own imports, I found that sometimes I forget to do that, and then that's why something's broken. So if something doesn't work the way that it's supposed to, and it looks like it works on the example that you're basing it off of, oftentimes it's that you forgot to do an import or something like that. So that's how you do collapse. Now the next thing I'm going to do is a modal. So I usually like to put my modals all the way at the bottom of the HTML. And I've prepared one. And I've actually seen that a lot of you have already created modals, which is great. So I won't dive too much into how you construct one. You can find other examples online, just like with everything else. So now I'm going to paste that in. So now I've got a div element, and this is the parent for the whole thing. It's got the ID of my modal, and then all of these elements that you put in just because it's part of the Bootstrap. If you want to see what each one does, you can look into it more in depth, Bootstrap modals. But this is basically just taking an example from one of the first website heights or website examples. Now I'm going to save that. And I need to somehow call it. So I'm going to call it with, let's say this help, okay? So I've got, what do I code the help? I code it right here, actually, right above it. Great. So I'm going to rename this from an H2 into a button. It doesn't need to be a button. It could be, I think I probably could keep it as an H2. I just want it to look like a button because I think that would make the most sense for what I'm trying to do. And now the class will be BTN, and let's just go BTN info. Again, if you want to look at what the different classes are for Bootstrap buttons, all you have to do is Google Bootstrap buttons, and then you'll see those examples. Type button, so class, BTN, BTN info. And now to do more of these data toggles. So in this case, because I want a modal to show up, I call this data toggle modal. And then the data target, does anyone want to guess what the data target has to be? Hint, it's very similar to what it was for the collapse. What am I looking for? So I've set it up to say, when I click this button, I want it to toggle a modal. Now, what am I going to use data target in order to do? What will that signal to the code? Anyone? You get credit even if you guess wrong. You get credit for participation. So I encourage any and all participation here. All right, so data target is I'm just calling the ID of the thing I want to target. So in the case of the collapse, it was that up here. Okay, so data toggle collapse, data target was my nav bar, and the hashtag to indicate an ID. So look for the ID of my nav bar. So if I go all the way back down to the help, I've got data toggle modal, data target blank. Anyone want to guess what the data target should be now?
Would it be hashtag my modal?
Exactly. Great job. So hashtag my modal, and that's basically just telling it, hey, call up this modal. Because I could, in theory, create other modals. Maybe one is for help, one is for contact us, another is for some kind of patient activity. So if I wanted to do that, I would have that, right? Another modal that says like my patient, another modal that says my contact. Doesn't have to say my, but it's just a unique identifier, unique ID. And then the button that has that ID on the data target is going to be the button that pulls up that modal. So if I click help, I think I might have to reload. That pops up. Cool. And then of course, if I had this example in my prototype, I would put things here, right? Different images, media, whatnot, to make that really fulfill the user story. So that is all I'm going to talk about with Bootstrap for now, unless anyone has any other questions. The next thing I'm going to move on to is cookies, how to use JavaScript to both save and retrieve cookies, basically substitute those cookies for some sort of database so that you can start doing stuff with user data. And then the final step before we break off into teams is to use JavaScript to then manipulate that data in an algorithmic way to produce a result. So before I move on to that, any questions about Bootstrap, modals, collapsible nav bars, anything like that? Okay, so next step is going to be to create a new page because there's just too much going on here. I want the user to now go to a different page for the next step. So I actually want a profile page. Now we've created this insurance plans thing. How about we have this link to the profile page instead? If we're going to do that, what do I have to change this H2 into to make it link to something? Any guesses? So this is now an H2 element with a class and a name called profile. If I want this to be a link instead, if I want to link to a whole nother HTML page where I have my profile information, what do I have to change this into? What kind of element?
Link element?
Yes. And what's the signal, or what's the sign for a link? This H2 would become a what?
Is it A, high ref equals?
Yes, A.
Okay.
So A, href, and then I need my link. So in this case, we're going to link to a document called profile.html. All right. So I'm going to reload this, and now I can see that this links to a profile. Formatting's all screwed up because the A actually does not necessarily give something its own line. If I wanted to give it its own line, I could actually turn this back into an H2 with an A within it. That should work. But you can play with all kinds of ways to make that happen. Okay, so that worked, right? So now I click profile, and oh no, nothing happened. And the reason nothing happened is because I actually don't have an HTML file called profile.html. So I just have to create that. So in this case, I'm going to create profile.html. And then I'm going to copy all of the head information because that's just the stuff that I normally find that I miss. And I copy head down to body and put that into the profile.html. Then I'm going to close out that body and then close out the HTML. So now I have a blank canvas that's got all of the imports that I'm going to need. Now, Derek, I know that you mentioned that your team, I believe you were able to link to your new HTML, but it wasn't importing CSS correctly. Is that?
Yeah, all the links work, but the CSS didn't carry over to the other HTMLs.
Okay. So my guess as to what happened is maybe in this case, I'm importing the CSS. And in this case, it's going to work because I'm telling it to import the CSS. It's going src/styles. So my profile is in this folder, which is basically just the home folder. I need to tell it to go into src and then styles. So it's possible that maybe this profile is already within src. And so to tell it to go into src within src doesn't make any sense. Make sure that your profile HTML is in the same folder as your index HTML. That's just to make it as simple as possible so that your imports are all the same links. Because when you have this href and it doesn't start with like an HTTPS :// it's doing what's called a relative link. So it's basically saying, okay, start in the folder that I am in, look for the folder src, then look for the file styles.css. If it's already in src, then it's looking for this other src folder within there and it's getting thrown off. Does that make sense? I know I threw a lot of src and all that, but basically the long and short of it is that try to make sure that all of your HTML files are in the same folder. It's just going to make things a lot more consistent. You're not going to have to worry about imports from one file having to have different relative paths than others. As long as they're all in the same folder, then they should be able to use the same href link to find the same file. But that's something we can talk with as we do the breakouts if that didn't turn out to be the problem. All right, so I've got my profile, and now I'm actually going to copy a bunch of code into here because it's pretty standard code that actually I've seen most of the teams have already figured out. It's basically the code from Codecademy forms when you were creating that hamburger menu. But I've just changed it for different user profile attributes for a health app. So now I've pasted that in. And let's see what happens when I click profile. Okay, so I click profile and now it's all shown up. The formatting leaves something to be desired. So let's go ahead and format some of this. Okay, so one thing I'm gonna do is I've got my profile container, and that's basically the parent div for the whole profile. And I'm gonna give it a margin of 12 pixels. And the reason I'm doing this is because I just don't like it being leaning up against the left side like that. So I've done that, and then that'll change when I reload. Now I'm gonna do personal profile. Actually, no, not gonna do that yet. First, I'm gonna do, I want all labels to have a margin bottom of 12 pixels. And then the other thing, I need to somehow get it so they're all on their same, they all have their own line. So let's see if we do display. Actually, I think I probably just have to reload this. Okay, so now they have the margin, but they're still not on their own line. And even the profile container doesn't have. I forgot to put that div in. Okay. Now I've created the profile container parent div. Now it's nice and formatted, okay? But you all already pretty much know how to do that. I've seen it with your apps, so that's great. Now, what I want to do, let's go down to, so I've created this submission button. So this is one thing that is a little bit different from what you all have done with your own, is for my input, I've created an ID called Profile Submit. And this is basically a trigger for a bunch of JavaScript that we're about to write. So I'm going to go into the index.js JavaScript. And we're going to create an event listener. Does anyone remember what an event listener is in JavaScript? Give you a hint. In this case, it's going to say click. Anyone? I know you all have built event listeners. I've seen them.
Does it look for the user action?
Yes, exactly. So it's basically listening. It's waiting for a user to click that button. So they want to click a button with the ID. And in this case, we're going to take that ID from that submit button, which is profile-submit. And then when they click, it's going to perform a function. And you should be familiar with this now from your learning on JavaScript functions. So when they click this, what I want them to do is I want it to create a dictionary. Does anyone remember what a dictionary is? You should have learned this in your Code Academy. That thing with the squiggly brackets. So a dictionary is basically, it's an array So it's a JavaScript array that has a set of keys and values. So if you were to have a dictionary, and you can actually picture it as a regular dictionary where your key is the word and your value is the definition. So if I have, in this case, this profile info dictionary, then, and I want to add a value, I'm going to call it, and then using this format, which you can just kind of copy, I've created a key. So profile info, the key in that dictionary is name, and I want that name to be whatever they put in the profile under name. So here it's this label for name, what is your name, and then this input, type text, name, name, ID, name. So I'm actually looking for the value of whatever they put in the input with the ID name. And so the way that I do that is same thing that I've done in the past to call up a given element, that $, quotes, hashtag for an ID, and I want the ID that is called name. So that's going to be the input with the ID name, and I'm actually looking for its value. So let's see if that works. There's also this concept of console.log. Now, console.log is basically a way to debug your code a little bit. So I want it to print out basically whatever it is that I call. So in this case, let's see if that $name value actually gives the name that the user puts into that field on my profile. Okay. Unexpected token. Oh, so this is just indented incorrectly. So it's just the type of thing that happens when you're coding. Oftentimes, the problem is just that you put it in the wrong spot. So in this case, I accidentally put it within this slick thing. So I just need to create its own line, and now this should work. I'm actually going to get rid of this slick thing because it really does seem to be throwing everything off. Okay. So what's my name? My name is Will. Now I'm going to submit. And nothing came out. Let me try doing an alert. Okay. So I think the reason this is screwing up is because I put it within a form. We actually don't have to use a form. Forms are more for if you're using a backend database. So let's see what happens if I just make this a div. And the reason it's screwing up is because when you have a form, it tells the web page to go somewhere after you click submit. And then sometimes that can just interfere with your JavaScript. But in this case, it's not really, oh, so actually the problem, and this is something that happens, like I said, all the time, is that I forgot to link to my JavaScript file in my new HTML. So this is actually, it's kind of good that that happened because it enables me to show you that this sort of thing happens all the time. It's just something you have to be very cognizant of. So now let's reload. So because it wasn't linking, this event listener just didn't exist on that HTML page. So now it should exist. Now when I click submit, it gave an alert that says will. So I know that that worked, okay? So now I'm gonna do the same thing for the URL. So I'm creating another dictionary key, and this time I'm going to call it Profile Pic, because that URL is going to be for an image. And then ID for pic. And then I want the value of that. So just the same thing, just a different category. Okay. So now I can put will here. And then here I've actually got a pre-submitted thing. So now what if I do, I want the alert for now, profile pic with the key, or the, sorry, profile info with the key for profile pic, okay? So let's try that. Oh, I have this val thing. Okay. Let's do will, and do that, now submit, and see now it has indeed gotten the entire link that I implemented into here. Okay, so when I'm doing these cookies, I could have just stored each one as a separate cookie, but you can see what I'm trying to do here is create a dictionary that contains all of my profile information so that I only have to save one cookie for my profile data. So let's go on to the next thing. So next one is role. And now role isn't quite as simple. Oh, actually it is. Role is basically a label for role. And now you can see that I've got a select name with an ID of role, and then all of these options under select. So the value of that ID role is going to be whichever option I select, whether it's patient, provider, producer, or payer. So this one is pretty much the same as the other ones. I just have to use a different ID. In this case, role. Okay, so now I've got these three. Now the hard one is this one right here. So this is a checkbox. So it operates a little bit differently because I could check all three. So what I have to do is I have to create a list. So does anyone remember what a list is? So we talked about a dictionary, which is basically an array with keys and values. Does anyone remember what a JavaScript list is and what the difference is? It's the one with the straight brackets. Okay, it's essentially a much simpler version. It's just a list. It's an array that contains several different variables. So I want to create something that if I were to click, you know, in this case, 3 different checkboxes, I want the list to say, in this case, diabetes, comma, cancer, comma, COVID. So I've created an empty list in order to house that information. And now the way to figure out which ones have been checked, this one I actually had to go on in Stack Overflow. So I went on to Stack Overflow. I actually Googled how to find, let's see, checkbox in jQuery. And now I went on the Stack Overflow, and I found this is actually something that looks pretty similar to my code. Oops. So my code for the checkbox, it's basically this label for diabetes and then a bunch of inputs and labels with the checkbox. So in this case, diabetes, ID cancer, ID COVID, ID IBD. So this is very similar. And they say, okay, the way to do it is basically create an empty list and then use this where you do the ID of the checkboxes, whatever they happen to be, make sure that the input is checked, and then go through each of them. So this each is basically saying iterate through each checked checkbox and then push whatever the value is into the empty dictionary, or the empty list, sorry. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. And will that work? Let's see. So I actually didn't create a name on these checkboxes. I just have a type, class, and ID. So in this case, even though they're looking for the attribute name, I'm gonna just change this to ID, and that'll work. So a little bit about what's going on here. So they've looked for the ID, and this says checkboxes, but I actually, this is different from what I ended up implementing. So I'm just gonna put what I ended up implementing, and you can copy it for the use of your checkboxes. Sorry, people keep dropping in and out. All right, so input, I'm gonna do type equals checkbox. And then each of those are checked. So I'm basically telling it to look at all of the inputs that are of type job, or of type checkbox, seeing which ones are checked, and then iterating through each of them. So I'm basically going through each of these inputs as long as they've been checked by the user. And then I'm trying to find their attribute that is ID. So in this case, I've labeled each checkbox the ID of whatever the label is. So diabetes, cancer, COVID, IBD, etc. And then I'm going to push whatever that is into my diseases list. Okay. And then just to make sure it worked, let's create an alert for diseases. A couple other things I want to bring attention to. And, I think the main thing to bring attention to is just get good at Googling and using Stack Overflow, and then try to figure out how whatever the answer is relates to whatever your code is. And then if you can't figure that out, just send me a question and I'll help you. So that's how I came to the conclusion of this. And then here, I'm basically using the JavaScript function push to put a new variable into this list. And then this is just a function of each. So when you're iterating using this each function, this means whatever element I'm currently iterating through. find the attribute, find the ID attribute of that, and then push that into this list. So let's see what happens when we try it out. Let's type COVID, or I think this is, yeah, COVID and IBD, or no, cancer and COVID, sorry, the checkbox is after the label, so that worked. So I was able to create the list of cancer and then COVID, and then put that into the alert in the form of this diseases variable. Any questions about that? That's basically how you extract data from inputs from the user. So the main thing you're going to use is this val. So it's super simple. You just call the ID of whatever the input is that you want to get the user data from, and then dot value, VAL, and then that's going to get the data of whatever they've typed in there. With something like checkboxes, you just have to get a little bit more fancy. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. Just make sure that you're doing some Googling, using Stack Overflow, and then using me if you can't figure it out. So now that I have all of this information, actually in this case, I need to add diseases into my dictionary. So I'm going to create a new key for profile info, and I'm going to call this diseases. And I'm going to put my list into there. All right, now the final thing, cookies. So the first thing you got to know about cookies is you can actually do it with just plain old JavaScript, but it's just a little bit ugly and complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a dependency called JS cookie. So all I got to do is click that. I've added it. And then I'm going to import at the top of my JavaScript, import cookie from JS cookie. Okay. And now that I've done that, and again, with any of these JavaScript libraries, all you got to do is Google the library and it'll tell you the instructions of how to use it. But just to shortcut that part, I'll just tell you how to use it, which is cookie.set. And then you want to name your cookie. So again, this is another, it's kind of like a dictionary. I want to create my key. So I'm going to create a key called profile. And then I want the value to be profile info. And profile info, again, is this dictionary that I've now created that contains name, profile pic, role, and diseases. All right, so I've now set that cookie. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to make sure that when I click profile, I've got this. I would actually like, if they've already submitted their info, for this to not show up, but instead for their profile info to show up. Now there's plenty of different ways we could do this. You could just have your profile data input, so this profile form, be a separate page from your actual profile. But in this case, just that I don't have to create another HTML, and also so that I could show you a little bit about how JavaScript can be used to change the HTML of a page, I'm going to create some code that looks for the cookie, and then if the cookie exists, puts that information and replaces this with that information. I'm going to do an if statement that says if cookie dot get profile. It's basically saying if the cookie profile exists, because cookie.get is basically saying, hey, can I have the cookie with the key name profile? If this has never been set, it just comes up as false. So if profile has never been set, then this is going to come up with false and it's not going to do anything. However, if it has been set, I want it to replace, oops, more people are dropping out. Is anyone else who's still here having problem with internet speed? Seems like today's been a little bit more of a struggle than other days. All right, well, I'll continue. So if there is a cookie for profile, then I'm going to create a variable and I'm going to call it profile data. We'll call it profile data from cookie. And it's going to be cookie.get profile. So essentially the same thing, right? I'm saying if this cookie exists, then put the value of that cookie into this new variable called profile data from cookie. Now, one other thing that you need to do, you don't need to do this if your cookie is very simple, if it's just a value, but because I've created this fancy dictionary, I actually have to parse it. You don't have to worry too much about what parsing is, but you can just see the code for how you do it. It's going to be json.parse, and then I'm basically going to parse this variable. So if I don't parse it, it just comes out as a string. And a string is really just, it's, you know, if I were to copy this into a text document, it would be a string, but it wouldn't be real code. If I want this profile info to be a real dictionary that I can use in JavaScript, I just have to parse it. And parsing is basically telling the JavaScript browser compiler to turn that string back into real data. And there's a lot of fancy stuff that goes on behind the scenes, but as long as you know that command, you can figure out, okay, I want to just turn this dictionary back into a dictionary. Because as a cookie, you just have to store it as a string. So that's just kind of some details, more in the weeds than you need to be for how cookies work. Okay, so before I do this, I'm actually going to create some blank fields on my profile HTML. So I've got this profile container, and I want to go, or actually this anonymous profile, I want to go outside of this div. So outside of this parent div, which ends, it looks like right here, I'm going to create a new one. And we're going to call this personal profile. Now within this, I'm going to create some headers. Let's say Profile Pic in this example. And then I'm going to create an image for my picture with an ID called insert profile pic. And then class will be profile pic. And then we're going to leave this source blank, but we're going to use JavaScript later to fill that in. All right, so I've got this blank image right now. I'm going to create name for the name of the profile. And then we'll do a P class with an ID called insert profile name. And then again, this will be blank. I forgot to close the quotes on that, but now we're good. I'm just going to copy this. So the next one, remember, is role. Insert profile role. And the next is disease. Insert profile disease. And this is just, these are the cookies that I ended up saving, and I want to put them into those empty fields. Okay. Now going back to the JavaScript, now that I've put this code that says, hey, get this information from the cookie, right? Cookie get, and I parsed it so that it's real data, not just a string. I can now put all this info into those insert profile whatever elements. So let's start with insert profile name. Remember, I've created that P element with the ID insert profile name, but it's blank. So in order to fill it up, I'm going to use the JavaScript function of text. And then as the text, I want to put profile info, which is my new variable, and then the key for name. All right, and the reason I'm doing the key for name is because early on, when I had my profile submit, I had saved the name as the name that they input in the value of the input of this form. Okay? Let's do one more for role. Now I'm doing the insert profile role, which is the blank element right here, and then changing the text to whatever they had inputted as their role. Okay, and then the last one is, let's do the insert profile pic. This one's a little bit different. I'm actually going to use the ATTR, which is the same thing we used here, right? We're trying to get the attribute named ID. In this case, we're going to use the ATTR to set an attribute. So the attribute that is called SRC, and we're going to use the profile info called profile pic, which again, we saved up here, okay? Okay, let's see if that worked. What is this? Can't import an empty path. Oh, maybe it's this. Just get rid of this slick. Slick seems to really be messing with my code. Oh. All right, well, I guess we get to debug a little bit. So why would I be getting this? Can't import an empty path. Probably a typo somewhere. Okay. None of that really makes any sense to me. Let's see. One thing I like to do when I get an error that doesn't make any sense is I like to erase a bunch of stuff and see if that fixes it. So I erased pretty much all of my JavaScript. And that didn't fix it. Okay. So that's actually a good sign. It means that my JavaScript is not my problem. It's probably something here. I wonder, you know what? It's probably the fact that I put this with a src that is blank. So why don't I just change that to a hash? Is there a question?
No, I just wanted to say the same thing. I saw the solution on the Stack flow. They say that you can change it and put like an hashtag.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I've got that. I actually want this profile pic to be hidden, and because it really shouldn't be there yet until I've actually submitted my form. So personal profile on my CSS. We're going to do display equals none. Okay. So now it doesn't show up. I'm going to put my name. I'm going to put this link to a picture of mine. I'll say I'm a producer, and then we'll say I'm interested in diabetes and cancer. Now I submit. And then I think, in that case, it's now saved the cookie. But let's find out. Okay, it has not saved the cookie yet. So now I have to figure out why. Let's see what happens. Let's do an alert called profile info. Okay, so it actually did create the object, which is a good sign. I think maybe what happened is I deleted that form because I thought it was causing my earlier issue. I think that's probably a bad idea. Because the nice thing about the form is it does kind of reset once you click submit. So let's try again. Okay, it's possible that the cookie's not saving. So why don't we do alert cookie get profile. Oh, okay. Well, it actually did work. Cool. So the only problem is that it's just not changing it. So this is, let's do an alert called, we'll call it cookie retrieved. Oops. Looks like that's working just fine. Oh, okay, so here's actually a problem that I've discovered where, because I've got this always asking for the profile cookie, even if I'm on the home page, it's going to keep trying to do this. So I actually don't want that to happen. So I'm going to create a whole nother JavaScript page. I'm going to call this profile.js. I'm going to put it in the source just for consistency with my JavaScript files. And then I'm going to copy all my JavaScript from index over into here. Now remember, I also need my imports. Very important, otherwise none of it will work. So now I've created this new profile.js. And if I go into the profile.html, I'm just going to change this import from index.js to profile.js. Okay, so that should help. I don't think we're there yet. One thing we've got to do is now, because I've got that profile data as hidden, I've got to show it. So now the element that I named personal profile, I want it to show. And then actually, I'd like to hide the form. So the form is called anonymous profile. I want to call the class called anonymous profile and hide it. So I'm hoping, it's oftentimes tough to debug in real time like this, but I'm hoping that this is going to solve our problem. Okay, so it worked. Now the formatting is not great, but you can see that it's now showing my profile. And obviously that's not me, but that's just an image that I found on the internet. So there you have it. That's how you can use JavaScript to grab a cookie. It's by implementing this, or adding this JS cookie dependency, importing cookie from that at the top of your JavaScript file, and then inserting the data that you had saved. You'd saved it as cookie set, and then you're getting it as cookie get. So it's basically using these keys and values. So when you set a cookie, you set it with the key profile, and then the value, whatever you want that value to be. In this case, it's an entire dictionary called profile info. Then when you get it, you just do cookie get, and then whatever that key is. So it's a lot, but I think if you review the lecture, if you want to implement any of this, it should be pretty clear how you would use this with your own app. Any questions? Okay, so the last thing that I'll go through is I'd like to do a evaluation using cookies. So we're going to do an integration of both a cookie and an algorithm. So we've done profile. Let's change this contact us. So let's close profile.js. We don't need that anymore. We don't need profile HTML anymore. Let's just work off of the home page. I'm going to look for that contact us right here. Now I want this to link. So let's put an href. I'm going to link it to a new HTML file called diabetes. Okay. So now when I click the Contact Us button, it's going to take us to this new HTML file, which doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to create it right now, called diabetes.html. So let me copy everything down to body, put that into my diabetes.html, close the body, and then close the HTML. And now I'm going to put my algorithm info here. Now, the way that I'm going to do this, and I've pre-prepared this, is I want to create a bunch of questions sort of in the form of a screener. So I'll just paste the HTML, and then we'll go over it. So created a screener container, and this is just to keep everything well formatted. And we can go over that in the CSS later. Then I've created a bunch of parent divs. So this div has an ID of question-1. This one has question-2. This one is question-3. And so I've got these 3 questions that I want to ask, and I want each question to have the question text. In this case, what is your HbA1c level, right? Important for diabetes. A place for them to put that input, and then screener buttons. So in this case, this one just says next, right? But then in the next one, what is your glucose level? They can both click next, or they could go back in case they want to go back to the H1 or HbA1c and put a different answer. And then the buttons on question 3, it just says submit. And then there's also back if they want to change one of their earlier answers. So this one is an input. Pretty straightforward. It's just going to be a blank text for them to actually input a number. The glucose one is going to be selection options. So this is, again, something that we learned in the Code Academy with that hamburger menu. So it's just another variations of the same. And then the third one is actually a radio button choice. So you could choose yes or no. Okay. So you can review the HTML, but it's basically just your standard form HTML. But the key is that I've got these IDs for each question, and then I also have these back and next buttons. And each back and next one, in this case, the next button for the first question has the ID of show question 2. For the second question, the next button says show question 3, or the back says back to question 1. And then in question 3, the final submit is has an ID of screener submit, or if they click the back, it goes back question 2. And those IDs are all going to be very important in the JavaScript that I'm about to write. Okay. So first, let's see if the link worked. Okay, so I've got all of my questions here. The HbA1c level, and this is a number thing, number box. The glucose level, the selection box, and then the symptoms, which is a radio. Just want to format this. So I'm going to go to styles. I do screener, container, margin top. I'm going to give it some space, so 20 pixels. And then I'd actually like everything to be in the middle. So remember this screener container is all the way up at the top. It's my parent element. So if I put text align center, it means that everything else is going to be centered within the screen, which is what I want in this case. Now the screener text question text, that's just right here. The actual text of the question, in this case, what is your HbA1c level? Just want to make this big and readable. So our font size will be 24 pixels. Margin bottom, 12 pixels, so that we've got space on the bottom to leave space for the answer. And then let's just make it blue so that it really sticks out. Okay, now our screener answer class. In this case, it's our answer choices, right? So the text box that we put our screener answer into. Let's make this a little bit smaller. We'll make it 20 pixels. Margin bottom, or let's just give it a margin all around because it's within a box of 12 pixels. Next, I want to set my screener radio. So this is in question 3, my labels for the radio buttons. Before I set that, let's see what we've got. Okay, so a little bit more formatted, right? I want to make these a color, right? So let's do the screener radio. Let's make it orange. Let's give it more margin because we saw, actually, bring it up. You see that they're a little bit close together, and I'd actually rather them be stacked on top of each other. Let's give them margin, but not on the top bottom, instead just on the sides. Remember the formatting on margin. It's top, bottom, and then left, right? If we only give it 2 numbers. And you can find that out just by Googling margin parameters CSS. And then to give them all their own line, we'll do display block. Let's see what they look like now. All right, starting to look a little bit more formatted. And then let's actually create a button. So the buttons look a little square, a little bit boring. So we're going to do btn-screener. Give them a little space. So 12 pixels, in this case, on the top and bottom. And then auto on the sides because we want it to stay centered. Border radius, we're going to give it rounded corners, sorry. Give it a little bit more padding between the text and the edge of the buttons. And you give it a set width of 80 pixels. This time, we would like it to be displayed as an inline block, which basically means they'll be next to each other. So that's the next in the previous button. And then let's give them some shadows. You can refer back to previous lectures or just Google what each of these parameters means if you need a little bit of a refresher, especially in how it might relate to your particular site and the look that you're going for. Okay, so I think this looks about how I want it to look. Now the final thing that I want to happen is I would like my question 2 to be invisible, and then we'll do the same for my question 3. Display equals none. Okay. And in fact, one last thing before I move forward. Let's contact us, because obviously it's not leading to contact us anymore, but instead it's going to be a diabetes thing. Let's just change the name to diabetes. Okay. Now I click this and it's just the first question, that's it. Now we need some JavaScript to make everything else work nicely. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to create triggers for my next buttons. And I want those triggers to hide the previous question and then show the next question. So in this case, that trigger on the next button is right here, show question 2. So let's create an event listener for show question 2. And then on click, we want it to do a function where question 2, put that within quotes, is shown. And then question 1, we hide. Okay? And we'll just do the exact same thing for show question 3. When they click that, we want question 3 to show up and question 2 to be hidden. Let's do it one more time with the back buttons. All right, so remember we had given the back buttons an ID called back question 2. If that happens, we want question 2 to show up and question 3 to hide. And if we go back to question 1, we want 1 to show up and 2 to hide. So that should give us a nice looking screener. And let's see if it worked. Oops, that's my profile, not looking for that one. So HbA1c level, click next. Okay, that didn't work. It's probably because I haven't imported that JavaScript. Surprise, surprise. Let's go all the way to the bottom where the index was imported. Our index.html. And by the way, you've noticed that sometimes I have imported it at the top of the HTML, right, within the head. I could do it here. I could also do it at the bottom below the body, or sorry, below the last div. It doesn't really matter. The only difference is it's just when the JavaScript actually loads. So if you're concerned about the speed of your site loading, you would put it at the bottom. Because it would basically be saying, hey, only load the JavaScript after you've already loaded the HTML itself. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of this prototype which one you choose. Okay, so now it worked, right? I can go back, I can go forward, no problem. Now the last thing I want to do in order to actually get data from this is I want to start collecting cookies on their inputs into each of these questions. So when they click show question 2, which is basically this next box for the first question, I would like to save a cookie. So first I want to create a variable called answer1. And it's going to be, and this is very similar to what we did with the profile. It's going to be, it's telling it, look at whatever the element is, which with the ID HbA1c, which I set earlier, and then get the val. So what it's doing is it's going to this HbA1c, so that ID HbA1c, that input, which is basically input to that first question. And it's just getting the value of that. Once I've got that value, I want to set a cookie. And we're going to call that HbA1c. And the data is going to be whatever I got in answer 1. Remember to put this semicolon at the end of the action. So now for the next question, we're just something very similar. Answer 2 equals the value that we put in the ID called glucose. And then we'll set a cookie called glucose. And then the data is answer 2. So whatever they put into question 2. That's all pretty straightforward. I could do this as a dictionary like we did in the last one, but let's not complicate it again. Let's just create our own cookies for each variable. Okay. What do we got? I think that should cover it. The last thing we need to do is remember on the screener submit, so this submit button, I've got an ID of screener submit. Let's create another event listener. So when they submit, we're going to do the same thing as we did in the last one with the radio buttons, right? So this is basically how you look for the radio button. You do this whole input, look for the type called radio, look for each one that's checked, iterate through them, and then we're going to do this ID val. So the ID of the radio button is going to be this attribute ID. So it's basically saying, hey, we're iterating through whatever radio button is checked, and then of that element, find its ID. Because if you look here, the radio buttons have an ID, in this case, symptoms yes, in this case, symptoms no. For do you have any symptoms of diabetes? And then we're going to do var answer 3 equals label for, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. I just found this on Stack Overflow. So if you want to figure out how to do this, you can either copy what I've got or let me know, and then I'll help you out with it. But just to sum it up, basically what I'm doing is I'm getting the ID of whatever radio box was checked, and then I'm looking for the label for that ID, and then trying to find the text of that label. So what that's doing is it's basically saying, okay, which of these inputs was text or was checked, and what is the ID of that? So if the one that I checked was yes, and it's getting that ID, symptoms yes, and it's saying, okay, now look at all the labels and look for the 4 that matches symptoms yes. So it's just a roundabout way of trying to find yes, okay? It's just the way that the labels and the inputs interact with each other. Again, you can always find it on Stack Overflow, just Googling like, hey, how do I get the name of the label of whatever someone checked on a radio box? Or you could just basically take what I've done here, okay? So now that I've got answer 3, I'm gonna set a cookie. I'm gonna call it symptoms, and the data is gonna be the data to answer 3. Okay, so now that I've done that, I'm actually going to create a function. And I'm going to call that function evaluate diabetes. And then I want its inputs to be each of these cookies. So it's going to be cookie get HbA1c, cookie get glucose, and then cookie get symptoms. So I'm calling a function called evaluate diabetes. You'll remember this from the functions that you did in your Codecademy learning. And then let's put that function right here. Function evaluate diabetes. And it takes the inputs HbA1c, glucose, and symptoms. So within here, we're going to create a variable called diabetes. So this is basically, do I have diabetes? And here, we're going to set it as false. Because what I want to happen is I want it to go through a series of questions and only set diabetes to true if those questions happen to match the criteria for diabetes. The first question I'm going to ask is if HbA1c is greater than 48 and glucose equals greater than 120. And the reason why, it probably would have been simpler if I just made them both number inputs, but I just wanted to show a diversity of how answer inputs can be made. In this case, glucose just happened to be, excuse me, a choice between 0 to 100, 100 to 120, or over 120. So in this case, HbA1c is a number, glucose is just kind of a text string. So if glucose is above threshold and HbA1c is over 48, I'm going to set my variable diabetes to true. Now, if that's not the case, but my symptoms equal yes, then I want to ask one last question. If my symptoms equal yes and HbA1c is greater than 48, or glucose equals above threshold, then diabetes equals true. So basically this algorithm is saying set diabetes to false initially. And then if my HbA1c level and glucose level are high, then it's true. Otherwise, if my symptoms are actually match that of diabetes, and either one of my HbA1c or glucose levels are high, then diabetes is also true. If none of those conditions are satisfied, then diabetes stays as false. And this is something we went over a few lectures back. So I'm just turning this, what we went over back then, into practice. Now, if diabetes, so if it's true, essentially, then alert, you have diabetes. Otherwise, alert, you, you do not have diabetes. Okay, so one last thing. You're noticing that the JavaScript is interfering because I've actually got it imported on my home page as well as my diabetes page. That was probably a mistake. So I'm just going to create a new JavaScript file. I'm going to paste all of that over. So I'm going to copy all, put that into my new diabetes file, and then just erase everything I just wrote into the index. So sorry if that confuses things a little bit. But I probably should have just kept it separate from the start. Okay, so that should be fine now. But remember, now that I've changed it, I actually have to change the import on my diabetes HTML, diabetes.js. You really have to decide based on what you're doing in your different JavaScript files, whether it makes sense to keep them separate or keep them all under one file. It's going to vary from app to app. So let's try this out. What is my HbA1c level? Let's say it's 66. My glucose level is above 120, but I don't have symptoms. It actually called way too soon. Okay, so why did I get my alert right at the beginning? I think the reason is that I told it to call this evaluate diabetes function outside of my screener submit listener. So that was a mistake. I actually want to put it inside there because I don't want it to evaluate until I've clicked, until the user has clicked submit. Okay, so solve that problem. Now let's try it one more time. 66 over 120. I don't have symptoms. And it says you do not have diabetes. So that actually, I don't think that worked because it should have said that I had diabetes. But because that's the last thing that we've got, and I know that that was a lot of information, why don't we take our, let's take a brief let's take a full 10 minutes and then be back at 4:25, and then we'll break into the groups. I'll show you whatever I did that was wrong, and then we'll do our breakout room. But before we do that, any questions? Okay. Sorry, I know it's a lot of info. I just want to make sure that everyone's questions are answered. who asked me about how to do cookies, how to do profile data, how to do these modals. So I wanted to get all of that in there in an interactive, or at least a way that I could demonstrate it in real time. And then if you need me to put together any other things, maybe offline between this class and when the project's due, just let me know and I'll do that to help you address whatever individual concerns you have for your site. I just want to make sure we're all in a good place at the end of this class to really succeed on this project next Monday. All right, so let's come back at 4:27, or sorry, yeah, 4:27, and then we'll do our breakouts.
Well, would it be okay if I ask you a question about the previous thing that you suggested earlier in the lecture?
Yeah, absolutely. But everyone else can go ahead and go on their break.
Is it possible to share my screen with you anyway?
Yeah, let me make sure I think I have to allow it. Okay, give it a try now.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. So basically, I have my index HTML, which is the login page, and then I have all these HTMLs right here at the division area. So all the links work. This is supposed to be the home page, and then schedules and stuff like that. This is supposed to be the nav bar and everything else, but the CSS doesn't carry over. So the CSS I have in source, but then all my HTMLs I have in public. And it was weird. Every time I tried to transfer one of these HTMLs to the source page, source folder, there would be an error that would occur. Or if I tried to put the styles CSS into the public folder, then an error would occur. So I'm not sure if it's something within the code or one of these JavaScript files. I'm not sure what exactly is the issue. But what's supposed to look like, I made another sandbox, and then it's supposed to look like this. This is what the home page is supposed to look like. So it has like a nav bar.
Oh, that looks nice.
Yeah, but thank you. But the CSS just doesn't carry over. So
okay, so I think the problem is that you've got these HTML files are within public, but then where can you show me the link where they're referencing the CSS?
Oh. So let's do the home page. There you go. So this is my link. Link high reference style CSS, like CSS relative style stream.
Yeah. So in order to find styles, if you're assuming that it's starting within this public folder, it actually needs to go back one folder and then go into source.
Okay, how do I do that?
That makes sense, because you're telling it, hey, I know I'm in public right now, but I want to go back one folder and then go into source. So
it's looking for the style CSS within the public folder. Is that why?
Yeah, that's what it's trying to do, and obviously it's failing because it's not there. So
sorry, I just want to have more follow-up question to that. How come in the indexed one, it's working?
Honestly, I don't know why it would work for the index in that case. But what I would recommend doing is try dragging the source folder into the public folder and see what happens.
Like the whole folder?
Yeah, just put the folder into public and see if that helps. Oh, and then your styles reference needs to now be src/styles.
Like this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that works.
And then just try to change one of your other pages to the same thing, src/styles.
Oh, nice, it worked.
Cool.
Sorry.
Yeah. Derek.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to talk. I think the we have a problem in the login page. We didn't write it correctly. We are using another one to, yeah. Can you go to the back to the, yeah. Here, yeah. Yeah, in the index. Go
Yeah.
down, go down, go down. Like in the submit button, can you click, have you seen this one, the home page .html, lost your password, right?
Yeah.
So when you click, so can you refresh the browser? Yeah, can you go lost to your contacts here? Yeah. Click there. You see, like, I think we linked differently. Yeah, we are not supposed, like, I think we link the lost to your contacts to the homepage HTML rather
No, that
than.
happened for now. So in the previous message that I sent to the group, the submit button doesn't work since it requires you to go to another outside source.
Yeah. I understand that. I was talking about the login.
Yeah, the login.
Like, yeah. Like the button of the login should connect to the other page, not the lost contacts and the.
Yes, no, this was just for the user testing so they can get to the next page. The login button needs to be redone. That way it's not
Okay.
anymore. It's just it just goes to the next page. Because right now, let's send it to another database, which right now it's just a proof of concept. But
Okay.
for the sakes of the user testings that we were supposed to do over the weekend, the script, if you read it, the lost password and the don't have an account is just to reference the next homepage.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, so the next thing we need to do is probably out the form. That way we can just turn it into a reference to the next page. And then we'll have the lost password page and don't have it.
Yeah.
This was just
Yeah. And the below one, we have like a next page thing. I didn't know why we have that.
Which one?
The last line of the code in the index HTML.
The last line of the what? Right here?
Yeah, the 34. Line 34.
For the form?
Yeah, 34.
The last line of the form, there's nothing. Wait.
In index .html, the last one is say like the paragraph refers to next page.
The paragraph refers to the next page.
Yeah. Are you in the index.html, the line 34? Or mine is different from yours?
It might be different. Well, are you seeing my screen? Is this?
No, I'm not seeing your screen. Can you see my cursor? Like I put the cursor there. If you're sharing.
Oh, okay. Let me fork it because it's updated. So.
Okay.
So hopefully you can see that, and we'll talk about it more when we come back.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Later.
But yeah, thanks, Will, for all that. We just have to. CSS.
Yeah, of course, and you can kind of see how it all just. I think little tiny things can make a huge difference with coding.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
So definitely be very vocal about any problems like that you're having, and hopefully I can help you navigate through them.
So in terms of how deep we can make this code, our end goal is just to prove that the function of the scheduling works, since that's what the key selling point.
Yeah, just something that you'd be able to show to a potential user. And even though obviously a lot of the guts are missing to make it a really good product, you'd be able to show it to them and they'd be like, oh, that's cool. And they'd want to learn more.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Like be able to show one successful fulfillment of the user story so they could say, oh, you know what? I do want that.
Okay. Yeah, because we have the other tabs, which are like patients and staff, but for the most part, our goal was to focus on scheduling. So say we make an empty page for those things, then that should be fine, right?
Yes, that's fine. All right, let's get started again. I figured out what was wrong, and as usual, it's just something silly with the code. When I had this thing of cookies get, I had HB1A1C, the B was capitalized, and it's supposed to be a lowercase. So it's just a little typo, but now it works. We can in fact try it right now. So let's do diabetes. Let's say I have a low HbA1c, maybe a high glucose, but then no symptoms. So you do not have diabetes. Then I've actually now done this window.location.href, which allows my JavaScript to navigate the user. So if they don't have diabetes, it navigates them back to home. If they do, it navigates them to a new page called patients, which I've just created HTML as blank. But you can see from this how you might then, based on their answers, navigate them to a different part of your site. So that's everything on the code demonstrations for now. The next step is let's actually do the breakouts. So for the next hour, I want everyone to work as teams and really use this to ask me whatever questions you might have that can help me help you be set up for success. How are you all doing?
Okay.
Okay, we're just kind of thinking about revamping our site because the common theme that we saw in our user testing was that they didn't really like our color scheme. They thought it was boring.
Well, I'd say in the grand scheme, that's a not too difficult problem to solve. And the nice thing is, you know, with the color scheme, you can just change probably a couple settings on your CSS and then everything will change.
Yeah.
But I think you all are on a pretty good path. Nia, I know you were asking some questions. Is everything resolved on that?
Yeah, the thing that I couldn't figure it out, I figured it out. It was a div that I was missing, and I figured it out right after I emailed you, and I was like, oh my god. So yeah, it's all good.
And I saw you kind of rolling your eyes a little bit. I think that's the #1 expression when you're coding is you roll your eyes at yourself of, you know,
Yeah.
like just this one line. But once it's all put together, it's all worth it, I promise.
Trying to get there.
So any other learnings from the user testing?
Just that like certain like pages didn't go to their designated area, but that's like a simple fix for us because we just had that so we could like get the page set up and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that there's some bugginess sometimes to the code sandbox in general. So if that creates a problem, it's not going to be counted against you. Don't worry about, and I don't mean because some people have had problems with like coordinating and all that. If that's a problem, if it's a bigger issue that keeps you from doing your work, please let me know. Don't just, you know, assume that it's going to be forgiven. But if during the presentation there's bugs that screw things up, I'm not worried about that, as long as the product's there.
Do we have to have like the Java done set for like storing information and stuff for our presentation like on Monday?
You have to use it to perform a function that fulfills the user story, right? So keeping that same theme, you just need to fulfill the user story and do it in a way that's manipulating data. So it can't just be all, you know, in web design, we have static and dynamic in content. And the static is basically you just pre-put everything there, all the words and all that. I want there to be some interaction with something that the user inputs, whatever that might be. I know you all have that long screener, which I think is great. If you could use that screener to maybe direct the user to something more personalized, I think that would probably be a good example of using JavaScript to make your product delight the user.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. I'll be back. Also, I'd like you all to reserve maybe 5 minutes at the end to just show your site to everyone. Not even 5 minutes, actually, just 1 or 2 minutes. I just want everyone to kind of see where each other's at to help motivate each other.
Okay.
Flickr was giving me a terrible time when I logged on to KGI's photo stream. I couldn't get the URLs to copy and paste over, so I'm gonna have to look at that again.
no worries.
And then, yeah, I'll have to look at LinkedIn again as well.
I will.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
How's the team doing?
I think we're doing okay. We have our user testing and we're gonna, like we were just about to talk about it, that see all the changes that we have to make. We did just have like one question. Because the due date is in a week, we were wondering how functional are you expecting this site to be? Because the coding that we were going through today is a lot more in detail.
Yeah, I understand that. All I really want is there to be at least one feature that fulfills the user experience and uses some of that backend code to do so. So, you know, if you don't use any JavaScript, it's all, in web design, we call it static versus dynamic content. So static content is just the stuff you pre-put there, looks the same to everyone. Dynamic takes a user input in some way to change that. So in your case, maybe, I don't know, remembering, like I know you all wanted to do previously viewed videos, something like that. So you don't have to get too complex. I just wanted to, I know it was a lot today. I wanted to show everyone what's possible and to have that recorded so that you can all review it before Monday. So that was my goal there. I know it ended up being very dense, but don't worry too much about going crazy and doing everything that I went over. Just try to do a little bit. So use cookies in some way, or maybe use how a user answers a screener or survey or how they log in to personalize their experience just a little bit, right? Sending them to patients versus providers, something like that.
Okay, so just to make sure that we can like implement the different coding that we've been learning.
Yeah, it's really all about, so it's one, doing that. So making sure you adequately use JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. But then most importantly, whatever from your user testing you determine is probably the most critical feature, do that.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
But I did take a look, and I think you guys are in a pretty good place. I think it's just, you know, try to get a little bit of JavaScript code in there to do some cool things.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I guess that is where I need help with on the JavaScript end. We have a login page, and it like functions where like you're able to input, and if you don't input and you press submit, it'll just say like, please fill this out. But then the submit button, I'm not really sure how to like redirect it to like our index page or our home page. I know you use the Windows .location.href.
Yes. Yes. So there's two ways to redirect, right? There's the one way just through the links. So href on your HTML, and then whatever the file is that you want to direct to. But if you want the redirect to be based on how the user fills out the form, then you do probably something very similar to what we did with diabetes. So take the data that the user's inputted and then use that data to determine where you want to send them. And that's that window location href. And so you can just copy what I put into the code sandbox example.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's really just another way to do that href thing where you're linking to another HTML. You can do it either through the HTML itself or using JavaScript.
I have a question. With the cookies that you were doing earlier, it was like pulling information from like things like if you click this, it like saves that information. Can you pull that information to like a blank screen, quote unquote? Like instead of just like saving it, can you like make it like for like saved videos is what I'm thinking. Like if you check a button beside it to save the video, can you pull it to a blank like saved videos page and then it like pop up there?
Absolutely, yeah. And the way that most people would do it would be using an actual database and then using backend code. But you can definitely do that. I would encourage you to look at the profile example that we went over.
Okay.
And then just have the JavaScript save that information, that video, whatever that is, as a cookie. And then maybe name that cookie saved videos. And then when you go to the save video page, have JavaScript that gets cookie. And that get cookie
Okay.
be the save videos. And then it can just put that source or whatever it is into the file. So I think that would actually be a really good example of a backend feature that you could add that would demonstrate proficiency in JavaScript and would be cool.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Yeah, so the minimum requirement is just have one thing like that, but the more the merrier, right? The more you do, the better your odds of getting an A. And I'll go over a little bit of what the expected features are before we end this lecture. And then one last thing, if you all could take maybe 1 or 2 minutes at the end of the lecture before we get out, just to show everyone else what you've got so far. No more than 1 or 2 minutes, but I just want everyone to see where everyone else is. I think you're all in pretty similar spots, which is good.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, I have one more question before you go. So when we like pull up Code Sandbox, it goes directly to like the index thing that you had started. Is there a way to change the first page that you see?
So you're talking about it goes to my Code Sandbox or within your?
Well, we redid that index to keep it our like home page.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a way to change like what that first like page you see is? This way we can make our login page our first page.
Yeah, the easiest way to do that, because I don't know exactly how Code Sandbox determines what it picks as its first page. I would say just copy the HTML of your login page and paste that into your index page. And then whatever's in your index page, paste that into a different HTML file.
Okay.
That's probably the safest way to do it. But I'll look into it as well and see if I can find a smoother way to do it. And I'll let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. How are you all doing?
We're doing good.
Cool. Where's Mohammed?
I have no idea. It said his internet was coming in and out of his, what do you call it, at his area. So I'm not sure. He said he was going to hop on with his phone, but I don't think he ever did. I'm going to message him on chat.
Okay, I'll come back to you all.
Okay, thank you.
But any pressing questions for me?
As of right now, no, because we're just adjusting a few things since we got the style CSS finally working. We're trying to get the bootstrap starting on the schedule HTML right now. So.
Okay, cool. I think your site looks nice. I think it'll be very interesting to see how you end up doing. It sounds like the scheduling is what you're going to be focusing on. Yeah, so that'll be, to be honest, probably a little bit more difficult than what some of the other teams are doing, but that's good because if you do it right, I think it's really going to set you up well to get a good grade. So.
Okay, thanks, Will.
Be sure to let me know, as you have in the past week, if you've got any questions.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, in the final 10 minutes, I'd like each team to just share for no more than 1 or 2 minutes what they've got so far, just so that everyone can see where each other's at.
All right. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Like with the girl and stuff?
Yeah. So below whatever you see at the very bottom of the page, if you can do like a tab that says like my uploads and like kind of do like fake images and like videos of like just her recipes and workouts that she's uploaded over the time that she's had that count. If that makes sense. Okay. When you click on my photos for Facebook, it shows you like a collage, like a grid view of your images.
But did the okay, never mind.
I don't know if that makes sense.
How are you all doing?
We're okay.
Good.
Any pressing needs or anything I can help you out with?
I'm good so far. I don't know how late you guys are. I was able to get
I
that.
think I'm good.
Okay. Please
Yes,
be
yeah.
vocal in this next week. If there's anything that I can help out with, just send me an email. I promise I'll be helpful. I just want to
Okay.
make sure, because there's times taken that no one gets stuck trying to figure something out. And I can help you out to keep things going smoothly.
I do have a question.
Can we kind of? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
For our presentation next week, I know like we're supposed to have a fully functioning app, but does it have to be like perfect?
Good question. It does not have to be perfect. So two things on that. One, I know that there's sometimes glitches with loading the code sandbox. That's not going to be marked against you. Don't worry about that. I'm more interested in the code base itself than I am in how it looks, whether it comes off very smoothly during the presentation. The other thing is, what's most important to me is that you are able to demonstrate one feature that uses dynamic data, right? So in code development, we talk about static versus dynamic. Static, everything's just already there. Dynamic means that it's based on user inputs, whether that's user inputs for personalization or, in your case, probably something coaching related. And then JavaScript mediates that to happen. And then you're able to show, hey, we've done this, and this is a feature that helps satisfy our user story because ... So as long as you have one solid core example of that, then I think you'll be in good shape.
Okay. So would an example of that be like having like a graph? So when the user puts in their weight, and then they're marking their changes as they progress with their journey, would a graph be a good example of that to show like their changes of weight?
Yes, that would be a good example. So you're demonstrating that you're showing some level of tracking. And then because I know that yours is also coaching related, you might want to show, or at least fake, like based on the graph, maybe they're getting messages from friends or family. You don't have to have the messaging created, but it'd be cool to just show this is what it will look like.
So I was able to, on the profile page for my part, I was able to get like a recent interactions kind of thing under the profile. So it's like kind of like a message bar, and it shows you like, oh, you just received a message from so-and-so,
cool.
This morning.
That sounds great. Is there anything you'd like to share your screen on?
Does anyone want to share? My laptop keeps crashing today. It's just like overheated.
Yeah, I can share. Hold on.
Then one other thing, I told all the other teams this as well. If you could reserve maybe 1 or 2 minutes at the end just to show everyone what you've got, basically what you're showing me now, I think that'd be helpful for other teams to maybe get ideas of what's possible.
Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay, so this is, I'm kind of still working on like the carousel picture thing, but I
Mhm.
kind of just wanted to like show like an overview like during the login page. But so basically here we would go to the sign up page, which is this, and then they would sign up. And then this would be like the profile page. We're still trying to work on, we don't know how to get rid of this like navigation bar. Like we want it to be like,
I want it to be a drop-down menu next
yeah.
to the
Would what I showed at the beginning of the lecture be helpful for that? That Nav Bar Collapse?
Yeah. We were trying to
try
work
that.
on that
If
right
you
now.
have any problems with that, let me know.
And then so yeah, so this is what we have, and then we also like, for example, explore would kind of show this. Basically like other people's posts.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're still working on some of the other pages, but that's what we have so far.
Okay, great.
I think the biggest thing is getting that interactive thing. So I think Kevin is working on the graph for like your current rate and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But so far was what we have okay, like as far as explore page, do I need to add more, or can you kind of get the gist of it?
Yeah, I think I get the gist of it. I would maybe add just a little bit more like titles and descriptions, just to, it's like, what is this? But
Okay.
I think you're in a good place. And then, I would encourage you all, though, to really focus in on that graph thing, because I think that's probably going to be the biggest determinant of, is this really fulfilling the user story, right? Because it also shows that you've got a grasp of both the JavaScript component and the HTML and CSS component. So make sure you all, work on that and let me know if there are any questions on it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, just anything dynamic, I think, is what I'm looking for. Because I've been impressed by all the teams. You've been able to show that you've got a grasp of how you can create HTML, interface it with CSS to make a decent looking web page, right? Which is, I think, pretty cool. And now it's just, can we now add that dynamic part, which is not easy. And so if you got any questions, please send me emails. I'll be very prompt with my response, and I'll help you in any way I can.
Thank you.
Okay, and then for the last 10 minutes, I want the teams to just present what they've got. So if you could reserve 1 or 2 minutes for that, then that'd be great. How did the user testing go?
It was fine from my point of view. And I did two, one with my little sister and one with my friends. But then a lot of the common themes was just the CSS wasn't carrying over. So, and then I just adjusted the login button right now too. So now it actually works. But yeah, a lot of it was just like it seemed empty. But the flow was there because we had the HTML still up. So you can like go back and forth between the login and the home page still. So the flow made sense.
Okay. And have you all been able to meet outside of class? Because I know that, for instance, Mohammed has not been here the last 2 classes.
Yeah, we meet on Thursdays.
Okay.
So we do that. So we usually, when we come here on Monday, we divide tasks up and then have a few days to work on it. And then Thursday is kind of like finalizing those ideas, or if anyone has any issues, like updating and stuff like that. But then over the weekend, there's more time to finalize on those things, or those deliverables for the week.
Okay, great. And then Robin, Safuni, how have you all been doing?
We're good. Just working on like finding our calendar.
And Robin, what part have you been working on? Any questions for me to help you push through?
Oh, I'm good. I'm working on the HTML part for this one, so.
Okay. Safuni?
Yes, I'm working on the schedule too. I've written a code for the schedule, and I've imported the calendar using maybe I should ask this. For the case of the calendar, for example, I've created a division ID in my HTML for the calendar, and then I want to create a Java code. The Java code, should I put it in the source in one of the JavaScript app like Indexo app, or should I just use CSE to style my calendar? Because I'm really confused. What should I do?
Yeah. So are you talking about JavaScript or Java?
Yeah, the JavaScript. Like I've seen the certain JavaScript that you can write, and then it can display a calendar which you can be able to add events or put an appointment.
Yeah, I would recommend just putting it into index.js.
Okay.
Especially because it sounds like you're only doing that one JavaScript for the calendar, right?
Yes.
So in that case, I had to divide it in separate JavaScript files because I was doing, one for the profile, one for the diabetes, and another one from last class. So they were all interfering with each other. But if you're just doing it for one feature, one function, then I would just put it into index.js. That should be.
And should I link anything apart from that? Because like they have been linked by the button. How can I link like my schedule to the JavaScript I'm putting on?
Well, it depends on how you're going to do schedule. You could either have it pre-made as an array, you know, like a dummy data that you can put in, or based on user input saved as cookies. So you could go either direction. I would say once you get to a point where you're ready for that data, send me an email and let me know if you have any questions about how to move forward. Because it's hard for me to give too much advice without seeing it. But if you're able to show it to me, then I'm happy to help.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Gotcha.
All right. Sounds good. Any other questions for me? All right. We'll probably go back to the main room in 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, how are you all doing? Did we lose Natalie? Oh. Can you all hear me okay?
Oh, I forgot to get back into the class.
Oh yeah, oh, he's here, guys.
Hey, can you hear me?
I'm sorry.
Oh, you must have Natalie on the phone, huh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we ended up FaceTiming because we didn't know how to get her back in.
Yeah, she's been going in and out of lecture as well. Good thing these things get recorded. Okay, any other questions for me?
Actually, yes. So we have a background image. How do we change the size of that? I don't know.
Show me.
That's a basic question, but.
Usually with CSS.
So let's see. I can get this to work.
And it also depends on how you do the background image. There's 2 different ways to do a background image. So I'll see which way you did it.
So share screen. Okay, so what we did was take the
That looks nice.
Thank you.
Yay.
Image. So we took this image here and we put it here on line 16, but it's not showing the entire like width of the image because we have some stuff that's not shown right now. So how do we like do that? Like I was trying to figure out how to do it on CSS. I was looking it up, but you were here, so I figured I'd ask.
Gotcha. So when you set the image that way, which is the right way to do it, I think, with the background image, it's basically going to fill whatever that element is with that image. So it looks like it's filled. I think it's based on the way you've got it coded, it's filling the entire body. So do you want that to be longer or what?
Yeah, we want it to be the whole page because it keeps cutting off. Like that even happened when we had the background color, and I don't.
And part of the problem is that your page is just too short.
You might go into CSS.
Yeah.
You could go to CSS, yeah. So
and then I think it's because of our background size. We have it as a cover, but when we try to change it, it's not doing anything.
What happens when you change your height? So your width is 100%. With your height, make it like 1,000 pixels.
So now it's just really big. Let me see if that works on a different page that we have.
Oh, interesting.
That might make a difference. Hold on. So yeah, it still cuts off, and now it's all weird.
I think that's the issue. When we were playing around with this, whenever we changed the height, it pushed all of our content down.
Ah, I see. It might be that your image itself is not big enough. Maybe that's just how big it is. Click the image link or copy and paste it into your URL.
Oh, I have it. This is the image.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's possible that's just how high the image is. I think there's a feature where you can have it stretch. I'd encourage you to just Google around, so how to stretch background image all the way to the bottom. But my other advice would just be to try to use a bigger image.
Okay.
But I think you're on the right path. You'll figure it out.
Okay.
All right, so we'll rejoin all the groups in a little less than 5 minutes.
Sounds good.
Able to like easily access everything. No one will have access to your information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. So just a privacy disclaimer.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
You all doing okay?
Yep. We're just going through the user testing and figuring out what's been fixed and what still needs to be fixed and all that.
Gotcha. All right, well, it sounds like you're in a pretty good place. Figure out who you want to present to the class in a couple minutes, and then have that person get the share screen queued up.
Okay.
And we'll wrap up for today.
Okay. Sounds good.
Sounds good, Will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm about to close the breakout rooms. But before I do that, any specific questions for your team?
I think we're good.
Okay. So figure out who you want to present to the class. And then once I...
Are we just going through it, or?
Yeah, just very brief. I don't want it to be more than 2 minutes. So just kind of show everyone your favorite page, and if you want to link to another page that you're proud of, and just do that, just so that everyone can see where their websites are at, and then hopefully that serves as motivation coming into the next week. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you. All right, team, I'm gonna wrap up the breakout rooms. So figure out who you want to present for the next minute. Just 1 or 2 minutes, just basically walk them through a couple pages, and then we'll wrap up class for the day. All right?
Okay.
All right, welcome back. I'd like everyone to just present what they've got, no more than 2 minutes. And I just want everyone to see where each of the teams has progressed to, because I think you've all done a pretty good job so far. I think for the most part, everyone just needs to get that final feature component in. So use a little bit of JavaScript to perform a function that fulfills the user story. I think when you can get that, then you'll have a pretty good project on your hands. So I want to start things off with Team Disconnect. If someone could share their screen and then just present. Again, no more than 1 or 2 minutes. I just want you to show like the home page and then one other page, and then sort of what you're going for. All right, take it away. Make sure you're unmuted too.
Okay, I think I got it. So this is our sign up page, basically, where the user would input all their information. And then we have a questionnaire for them to go through to find out information about who they are and like things about their disease, but not too specific. That'd be like a real problem. Then we also ask their zip code. That's to be used for information to find people who are like close to them, so they can have friends that they can meet up if they wanted to do so. So here we have our news feed. So we just gave examples of what it might look like if you were already logged in and had an account. So there's different users, their profile pictures, and their chosen usernames. Here we have an example of like a video. If somebody wanted to add things, they can add pictures and videos to their stuff. We have our My Profile page, and this is where you'd create your profile, etc.
Cool. And what are you going to add next? What's the big feature that you want to make sure you got down?
We want to make sure that our groups actually works, because right now it's not there. It links to a different page, so we need to help kind of create that page to make sure that actually works for the user.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Next up, Inform Me.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so this is our website, and we have like our login page. Right now we're working on trying to get the submit button to work with like a specific username and password. So we're working on that back end. And then you would log in and it'll bring you to a home page. That'll kind of tell you like what our goal for this site is. And then we have like a videos page, so you can go and see like different videos about different things. And we're going to be working on putting a like save button within that, so that if it's something that relates to you, you can go to your profile and see like my saved videos and like link with cookies to like the saved videos. So that's our current goals, is like working on that back end. But
Very cool. Excited to see that. All right, next up, My Health. Actually, oh yeah.
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is kind of our login page. We're still kind of working on it. And then the user would sign up and then fill out their information here. And then once they sign up, it would take you to kind of like an overview of the account, where it's like their profile page basically, and you have these different tabs. We're still trying to figure out how to the nav bar is kind of in our way right now, but we're trying to figure out how to fix that. And then right now we're focusing on setting up these other pages, but the one we have right now is an Explorer page, which is basically where the user would go to explore other people's activities. And yeah.
Great. And then what is the big feature that you want to have implemented to fulfill?
For us, it's mainly the My Progress one, where you get to see your progress real time as well as others. So we still have to work on figuring that out. It would involve like tables and like stuff like that as you go, which showcases your progress.
Gotcha. Cool. Excited to see that. All right, and then last up, My Practice.
I had to mute myself. And then, there we go. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, cool. So this is our login page right now for My Practice. You could input whatever, and here, and you just click login, and it takes you to the home page. And this is our homepage. It has three main options for the provider, which is you can either view your patients, you can view your staffing, or you can view your schedule. And there's also a nav bar on top that can do basically the same functions, as well as a logout button right there. And then the main thing that we want to focus on, so you can actually go here, go back. The main thing we want to focus on is this right here, our view schedule. So we're trying to basically do like a calendar thing where providers can schedule either like patient appointments or staffing scheduling and things like that, all from this one app. So that's going to be our main focus goal. for the presentation is to get this schedules page up and running. But yeah.
Great. Excited to see that, how that turns out. Okay, cool. Well, I'm very impressed with where everyone is, considering that you all had no coding, or at least very limited front-end coding experience going into this. I think what you've been able to do to put an actual website on the screen, I think is very impressive. So great job on that. And I'm excited to see, as we make these sites more dynamic, what you can do. Because once you've got these skills, it really becomes a springboard for whatever you want to do in coding moving forward. So I hope at least a handful of you are not too deterred by the occasional tedium of trying to code and work out whatever kink or bug is in there, and might actually be interested in building more moving forward. And if you are interested in that, let me know at the end of the class, and I'd be happy to move you in the right direction. So I want to talk a little bit about the final project, because that's obviously what's on everyone's mind for next week. I want you to look at, I put some questions for each section of the code and then the presentation. I think if you all can answer those questions satisfactorily, you'll be in good shape. So with the code itself, with content, the question is, would a new user understand the purpose of the prototype without guidance? So is the site self-explanatory? Would someone, and this kind of goes a little bit to the user testing, if you had a random user come onto the site, would they know, oh, this is a coaching app, or hey, this is a way for me to assign and schedule patients for my practice? Did they understand that based on the site itself? So make sure you've got that HTML content that describes that project adequately, and always think of this in terms of the user story. Okay, next, design. So does it follow the design principles from lecture 2? Is there consistent coloring, font sizes, all that? Make sure that you've got a good looking site. Inputs, outputs. Does the prototype take inputs from the user and transform them into outputs that satisfy the core user story? Now, this is the one I think that most products are still lacking, but that's expected because you just now really learned a lot of principles of JavaScript. So I want you all to focus on that third point in this coming week of how can you take inputs from the user, whether that be saving a video or whether that be scheduling a patient, something like that. How do you take that info and use that to alter the page a little bit, make it dynamic in a way that is either personalized to the user or reflects the inputs that they put in. Data visuals. So this would be certainly relevant for my health, right? If we're going to track someone's progress losing weight, data visuals could be very useful. So make sure that your projects use, whether that be a chart, a graphic, just color coding, some kind of visual that shows user progress. And then finally, commenting. So this is something that you haven't really done too much of yet, but I want you to make sure that before this becomes a final product that you turn in, and this doesn't have to be due next Monday, but before the end of the semester, I want you to make sure the code is neat and commented. So every line that you've got, or every chunk of code that does one thing, explain what that thing is that it does. And you see examples of commenting in the code sandbox that I shared with you. Presentation is going to be about 15 to 20 minutes plus Q&A. I want you to really focus on the user story. So really focus on how is this site that you created going to fulfill some need of the user. So that's why I've really emphasized in the breakout groups with each team, figure out what that killer app feature is that's going to fulfill the user story and make that clear during your presentation. The other thing that's important is roles. So I want each team member to take part in the presentation and talk about what they specifically did. This is a team project. The final product is what really matters. But I do want to know what each of you did to contribute to the success of that final product. So in that presentation, each person should be explaining what they did and what they're proud of that they've inputted into the prototype. Methodology. So did you follow the agile methodology? So talk a little bit about how that experience was with your stand-up meetings, how you organized things, how that worked. And probably the Scrum Master would be the best one to explain that. This is sort of coming off of the Scrum doc that you've got. So talk to that a little bit and how you use that to create a successful prototype in the end. If you found that it didn't work, that's fine too, but I want you to explain what you did instead to make the project work. User testing, I also want you to go through what you learned in the user testing. Some of you, I know your product had some bugs during the initial run of user testing. If you want to then go back to those same people or add a few more users, now that your sites might be looking a little bit better or later in the week as it is looking better, I'd encourage you to do that. Okay, and then this is just, this is nothing, that slide doesn't need to be there. So that's all I've got for the lecture. We're out of time, so you all can leave if you want, but if anyone has any questions, I'll hang back a little bit.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So you said that this doesn't have to be due, or like the commenting doesn't have to be due on Monday, but is by the end of the semester. So next week is finals week. When exactly are you wanting this due by?
The end of the week. I'll send out an email. I do need to just kind of verify with the dean about, you know, when is that final day. But it'll basically be whatever that final day is.
Okay.
That's when you got to turn it in.
Okay.